Welcome to the Forter webinar, The Evolution of Fraud and Customer Experience. I'm Ally Feiam, the editor of Power Retail, and it's lovely to have you all here. So very shortly, I will be introducing our panelists, but before I do have a bit of quick housekeeping. If you could please switch all of your mobile phones to silent. Even though I won't be able to hear it, it's probably a good idea to double check because this is a session you won't want to miss. Also, if you have any questions, please put them in the little box on the side as we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Today we have Ata, the General Manager, APAC of Forter. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah. Thanks, Happy. Yes, so good morning, everyone. Ali, thank you for the opportunity. I understand that fraud sometimes is a little bit dry, so we'll try to keep this as entertaining as possible. I'll just sort of run through the agenda for you, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So really what we want to talk about today is really this sort of theme throughout my whole presentation will be the evolution of fraud, and at the same time the constant battle for the customer experience. So there's always this trade-off between protecting chargebacks and at the same time making sure that the customer experience is as seamless as possible. With that in mind, the real prominent theme in retail has become the sort of the focus on the customer experience, the journey, the wait time, the leniency, and then we're going to be looking at some industry insights. We're going to be looking at the methods of attack that the fraudsters are using, fraud trends around the world, and how merchants can prepare. So really, let's sort of start off with what's sort of happening in terms of fraud and the customer experience. On the one hand, you've got sort of the risk adverseness of most e-commerce players who are looking at protecting fraud, making sure that their fraud is under control. And at the same time, you've got the ever demanding consumer wanting instantaneous decisioning in terms of decisioning on the checkout to a really nice seamless experience. So really what happens then is that there's the constant battle between the fraudsters and the e-commerce operators trying to really align themselves with giving that great customer experience. In terms of fraud, fraud is changing, but also increasing. The types of fraud, as we will see a little bit down the track, the types of fraud are changing around the world, but in terms of the dollar amount, we've had an increase of over 12%, which just sort of shows you the seriousness of this trend. And on the other side of that, on the flip side, if the customer doesn't get the experience that they're being used to, there is a very high chance of them never coming back to your site. And again, that's sort of a really quite a bit of a dilemma for the e-commerce operator. Okay, so fraud is changing. Some of the areas that are changing is with respect to not only are fraudsters looking at transactional fraud, they're looking at other ways of sort of exploring or exploiting the journey through account takeover, returns abuse, refund abuse, in terms of loyalty abuse. So they're really not just attacking the transactional side of the consumer journey, but the whole range from sort of account login to a checkout. At the same time, we've got a rising sophistication of fraudsters. The fraudsters are really using automation. They're in a position to use fraud rings, and really because of the hardware costs falling, they can actually really start to provide their own sort of level of sophistication. Same time, what we've got is a real movement to e-commerce and a shift to online shopping, which just really means that there's a general push onto online, which is also putting strain with e-commerce platforms in terms of manual reviews, being able to check sort of suspicious transactions. At the same time, we've got a high propensity for flash sales coming through as a trend. It used to be in retail, Christmas, Easter was the busy times, but now retailers can actually make events throughout the whole year. And so we've got a real shift in sort of the sort of scalability of e-commerce trading. And on the balance again, and this is the theme that's going to be with us for the whole webinar, is really that at the same time of all the sophistication of fraud, you've got high expectations on the consumer end, which really sort of is the constant battle. Okay, so just want to sort of share my own personal experience with respect to sort of what's happening with consumer expectations. It's all become account based. Really want to answer yes and no with it in a split second. It's a seamless journey, and really there's a real strong interface between online and offline. You know, recently I was overseas and I wanted to use a ride-sharing company. I put in my account details, my credit card, and for some reason it got declined, and so I had to grab a taxi, which is something that I haven't been used to for a while. And once after my trip had been completed, I actually just got out of the taxi and started walking, and basically got chased by the taxi driver because I'd actually forgotten that my experience in Uber is that I just walk out of the ride share, out of the Uber, and just get on with my day. And it's really important to sort of understand that we as consumers are really sort of in our own DNA now are looking at this sort of account-based sort of relationship. The decisioning is instantaneous and it's just a seamless flow, and that's really the premise of the expectations of the consumer is looking at. Okay. So again, so I really touched on my last on my last slide, but really what it's all about is that the merchants, retailers are looking at a very seamless transaction, and really they want to provide that to their customers. And to do that, we have to be part of the whole entire consumer journey. Just wanted to touch a little bit on again customer expectations. You know, everyone really wants their purchases express shipped, and you know the express shipping. There's premium shipping, and that's a real great customer service, and everyone is really into that. I know my family has an amazing relationship with DHL and Australia Post, and we get shopping parcels every day. But at that same time, with that sort of consumer expectation is that, you know, really when we have premium shipping, we have a 3 times as likely risky chance of fraud, and with express shipping a twice as a risky expectation with respect to fraud. So that again sort of highlights the consumer drive for the consumer experience, but at the same time, more and more of that is driving more and more risky transactions. So I just want to sort of maybe spend a little bit of time going through some of the trends that we've been seeing with our fraud attack index. And over the last year, with respect to loyalty fraud, we've seen over an 89% increase in fraud attacks. And this is sort of really quite alarming, especially everyone that I'm sure in the audience has got some sort of loyalty points with airlines, with hotels, with different shopping customers. And really, again, it's all about what the retailers are providing their customers. And again, the fraudsters are able to monetize that experience and wanting to capitalize on that. So really, in terms of what we see as a trend for what our merchants are looking at in terms of caring about and providing for their customers, is definitely paramount is loyalty programs. That's a really strong priority for our merchants. The second point is providing an ease of return in terms of making sure that if there's a customer purchase, that they'll be able to provide that return policy. And obviously with that comes instantaneous shipping, same day shipping, sort of what we'd like to say the Amazon effect of people wanting their goods, especially you know, if they can buy it, if they want it now, and really that sort of expectations. Some more industry insights that we want to sort of discuss is that, again, in the travel sector, we've had over a 61% increase in fraud attacks. Again, quite significant. I know air travel, airlines and online travel agencies are growing, but it's not growing at 61%. We've had a very big increase in fraud attacks, predominantly coming from a lot of data breaches. And again, this sort of focus on account breaching and account takeover breaches, again, highlighting the need to protect the consumer journey throughout the whole transactional piece. Most of our listeners today are sort of in the apparel and accessory area, and again, sorry to report, but we've had an increase of over 44% of fraud attacks over last year. Again, you know, why is this popular? Well, firstly, it's a really easy secondary market to monetize their purchases, and the other thing that's really happening is that really the fraudsters are buying in bulk. You know, if you look at some of the recent examples with sand shoes and the trend with sand shoes being able to resell, making a bulk buy, creating a bit more of a demand and reselling that, has been a very exciting business for a lot of fraudsters. Again, this is in terms of the food and beverage area. We've had a very big increase in fraud, over 41%. Given the growth in the delivery platforms, people's trend is to again buy online. Groceries have taken a sort of a very big move to online shopping, and this has just really been an interesting sort of growth. It's been a consistent rise. It probably will continue as more and more people are buying groceries, buying food online, and using sort of delivery platforms for their takeaway deliveries. And again, the interesting thing about this area is that a lot of the sort of online delivery services are using coupons to attract customers, and there's a lot of coupon abuse with people opening up multiple accounts, which then sort of drive up the sort of the fraud in that area. Okay, and the last, I know in terms of sort of cryptocurrency, it's a sort of a new world for everyone, but again, we've seen a very big increase of over 48% in cryptocurrency fraud. Again, new category, a little bit sort of unknown, quite sophisticated in terms of the people that are actually the fraudsters. It's a new category, but very easy to monetize. Okay, let's looking back at sort of the methods of attack, and looking at some of the trends. And I think really, again, the theme here, or the discussion point, is the fraudsters will attack whatever is available to them. So if there's an opportunity to monetize coupons, they'll monetize coupons. If there's an opportunity to monetize returns, they'll monetize returns. So the growing trend is the sort of the buy online, pick up in store, or as we like to say in Australia, click and collect. What's happening there is that, you know, that's an amazing new sort of thing that's sort of been popping up. A great initiative by the classic retailers trying to combat with online. But what happens here is that, you know, again, if people are buying on a stolen credit card, they can actually use a stolen credit card and just hide around the corner, buy on their mobile telephones, and basically pick up the goods very much instantaneous. And that really can cause a lot of problems. There's no time for manual reviews. There's an instant decisioning that needs to be made, and the fraudsters are really taking advantage of that. And then really the same thing is sort of buy online and return in store, which again is sort of really part of being able to monetize anything that's sort of open for abuse. And again, really it's important for retailers to protect themselves with the returns policy. Okay, touched on coupon abuse before. and let's sort of have a talk about this one. Really, coupon abuse again on the rise. We've had over a 10% increase in fraud attacks over last year. This is a bit of a shame, really, because it's a real marketing initiative that marketing teams in retail want to be able to offer coupons, want to be able to test items, test new offers, but unfortunately, it's really open for abuse. And what really happens is that most of the marketing teams give it up, or they just close up offering coupons, which is really a shame. It also has a brand reputational issue, which becomes problematic. We touched a little bit about technology and understanding that really at the end of the day, the fraudsters are really taking advantage of the decline in hardware costs. So they're able to really sort of become their own little mini fraud companies and are automating their way they're attacking retailers. And we've had an increase of over 15% increase of fraud attacks where again, the fraudsters are using emulators, they're using proxies, they're using very sophisticated ways of being able to pretend or to act like a legitimate consumer, but in fact they're using automation and technology to fraud. So really, again, I think to highlight here is that the fraudsters are just as sophisticated as the retailers. And just like you and I go into the morning to work, these fraudsters actually go into the morning, get their cup of coffee and work out ways to defraud fraud retailers. Yeah, so I want to scare you. Fraud around the world. Okay, so look, the reason why we're all here is, we're very lucky that we're in an industry that's growing quite rapidly. There's a lot of changes, and it's been an interesting observation to see a lot of our merchants having increases of over 20-25% growth year on year, just basically growing because the size of e-commerce is growing. So we're very lucky to be in this space. Fraud around the world, again, with a lot of data breaches. There's an opportunity to use this data for fraudsters. That's really becoming quite an important issue, not only just in terms of data breaches that are affecting fraud, but what data breaches actually do to brand integrity. So, look, in terms of Australia, we've been quite lucky there hasn't been that many data breaches. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be, but I know in America, there've been a lot of very bad brand damage for a lot of companies with data breaches. And so really, again, very important to recognize that fraud around the world is also sort of quite sophisticated. As companies want to go and move into other regions, they look at opening up new markets, especially for us in Australia. There's a real sort of an interesting opportunity to move into markets like America, move into Asia, but with that cross-border sort of risk, you can add the fraud risk as well, because there's different fraudsters. It's just a bit like moving into a new neighborhood and not knowing the sort of the rules or where the good streets are, and that's really the same thing in terms of the sort of movement overseas. Again, in terms of fraud around the world, there's definitely regional nuances and variations. Again, having a sophisticated approach to fraud management allows sort of that regional variance to be normalized. And the other two, in terms of holidays and seasonality, again, just repeating on my last points about sort of Christmas and Easter being the peaks, that's no longer the case. Most retailers have already had their Christmas. They had it about a week ago, and so really what we're seeing is that the sort of seasonality is being able to sort of be controlled by the retailers themselves. Okay, growing the market. Well, that's what we like to do, and again, moving into these higher risk countries ends up sort of having a sort of big increase in fraud. And in terms of the US experience, really at the end of the day, that you move into new countries, you don't have the experience, the understanding, and so really you can end up sort of being in a big problem in terms of fraud. And you need to sort of recognize that as you move out of your comfort zone, out of your neighborhood, you need to have a good fraud prevention sort of basis. So good segue in terms of how merchants can be prepared. Again, recognizing that there's three really important components. One is that the decision making has to be in real time, because that really goes about what we were saying before about the customer's expectations. There is no point in having a very sophisticated fraud system that takes two hours for a decision on a transaction. It has to be in real time. The second point is that it has to be for the entire customer journey, not just at the transactional level, but with coupon abuse, with loyalty abuse, returns abuse. So we need to make sure that all aspects of the consumer journey are covered. And the third thing that's really sort of important is that it actually has to fit in with your business needs and your business model. And really that's, again, the level of sophistication. So what we're seeing in a growing trend in our business is that the off-the-shelf fraud tools are no longer being able to accommodate the needs of this end-to-end protection. Okay, the solution. Really, this is sort of becoming more and more of an interesting point, because what we've had in the past is we've had an area of consumer growth that just creeped up on all of us. We had a very small proponent of online retailing to everyone's normal physical retail stores, and over time this has been sort of changed very quickly, and you've ended up with a higher degree of online sales relative to bricks and mortar. And that's really sort of increased the urgency to move on to a lot more of a holistic approach. So really, in terms of how we like to see it, is that rather than focusing on any individual transaction, we're an identity-based solution. It really has to be an integrated platform, so that it really works with the whole customer journey. We like to see the whole view of the customer journey. We need to utilize the global network, because again, once we've opened up to this online world, your customer could be in the UK, it could be in America, it could be in Japan, in New Zealand. So you really need to leverage on the global network effect and understand that there's a whole amount of data out in the big wide world in terms of identity to utilize. Very important to be accurate. We haven't really spent too much time on accuracy, but really, again, the false positives in this world are very unforgiving. If you look at the lifetime value of a customer, it's very high, especially in online retail. So if you are declining a legitimate transaction because you thought it was fraud, that your manual review process decided that it was fraud and it wasn't, you pretty much lost that customer forever. And I think everyone's been in the position where we've been declined, and then particularly, really, everyone's sort of become global jet setters. They're all traveling. Everyone's making purchases from hotels, airline lounges. We're all acting a little bit more suspiciously. We've all got VPNs. We're watching HBO. We're watching American Netflix. We all look like fraudsters, but in actual fact, we're just legitimate people utilizing technology. And really, the sort of fraud solutions have to be identity-based rather than transactional-based, and to give that accuracy. And once you have that accuracy, you're aligned with your sort of values of making sure that the customer experience is in line. And that sort of basically goes to point 6 in terms of customization. At Forter, no product of Forter is an off-the-shelf product. It's customized to your needs, to taking into account the full range of the customer journey. Okay, in terms of takeaways. Okay, so really, what I'd like to sort of finish up on is, fraud. It's definitely not just about chargebacks. There's definitely a growing trend for fraudsters to monetize the whole journey. Obviously, still very important, especially when you have to report to Visa and MasterCard. We have to keep the chargebacks in line, and at the same time, we have to keep the customer experience. So really making sure that we don't sort of have this sort of high propensity to decline customers in terms of false positives, and really just to keep abreast with the different technologies that the fraudsters are using and the abuse that they're sort of causing retailers. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Ata. That was a really interesting webinar. It was just, I learned a lot, really. I didn't think that I would learn that much about it, but it was very impressive. So just before we throw it out to the audience, if you do have any questions that have been burning in your mind that entire time, please make a little note of them. But while I wait for these questions, I will ask a couple of my own. So how has fraud changed over the span of the last 5 years for retailers in the e-commerce space?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think some of my talks sort of addressed that. It's become a lot more sophisticated. Again, technology, the fraudsters use it. The other interesting thing about fraudsters, which is they're actually very happy to share information. There is no way that we would get two competing retailers in Australia to talk about fraud, but guess what? Fraudsters actually love talking about fraud. They open up their own personal chat sites, and they discuss how they've been able to penetrate a certain policy, a certain coupon, any sort of referral abuse, or actually any site that looks like it's open. They're happy to share credit card information. So again, the sophistication of fraud has really advanced, and I think that really because we can see that fraud is increasing while you've got everyone trying to combat fraud. I would say that the fraudsters are winning.
Ah, that's incredibly scary. So does Forter give a fraud score out of 10 to determine if a transaction is suspicious, or could you explain that process a little bit more?
So again, I think most of our listeners would probably have some sort of fraud tool, and most of those fraud tools are part of like a gateway solution, or they might have put in a platform. These platforms provide some sort of risk scoring, and look at the transaction and go, look, we'll give this score a 6 out of 10 of being, fraudulent or not fraudulent. And then what will happen is that, internally people will work out that, okay, I mean, really, what does a 7 mean? It means that we might have to look at it and sort of investigate what will happen. Then it might go into a pending. There'll be a customer success person bringing up the consumer and seeing if they can verify the consumer. Again, very, very friction bound, very labor intensive, not so accurate. It's really not where fraud detection is going. At Forter, we just give a very simple yes/no answer in real time. Real time meaning in under half a second. That sort of basically allows the retailer to provide that seamless experience to their customer.
You mentioned before that accuracy is one of the most important things that sometimes gets overlooked when it comes to manual reviews of fraud and things like that. So as we see a dramatic increase of flash sales like Click Frenzy and Black Friday, Singles Day, that sort of thing, and you've mentioned the risk that a customer might not come back if they have been reviewed as a fraudster and they're actually not. What are some of the other risks of these manual reviews?
Okay, so firstly, humans, we're great at painting, we're great at writing songs. I think that doing repetitive things and learning from that, and our concentration span is sort of a bit under question at times. And really, what happens, in terms of the manual process, is that you've actually got people looking at credit card details. And from a compliance point of view, it's pretty much a no-no, and that has serious implications for your brand to have actually humans dealing with credit cards. The customer experience sometimes cannot be optimal given that a person might be ringing up someone to verify their account, and that experience might be taken very nicely from the consumer. So again, what we're seeing is that not only is the manual review component add friction to the checkout, it might actually be a data breach issue.
Yes, I understand that would be a bit of an issue. So when it comes to the opposite side of that, which would be automation. So automation obviously is one of the fastest growing tech advancements in the industry throughout every sort of category. So what are some of the benefits of automation when it comes to fraud?
Sure. Okay. Good point. So it's been a very interesting journey in terms of retail. We've had the sort of the first wave of retail automation in terms of just online checkout. Then we've had sort of like the logistics automation. There's some amazing companies with marketing automation and everything else. And the same benefits that you get from automation in that journey, Forter can provide that automation operational efficiencies, saving in not only labor costs, but actually just providing a much better solution to the business.
So I'm going to throw it into the Forter branding for a second.
Sure.
With all of the fraud sophistication in terms of tech and the advancement that all these fraudsters have, how does Forter protect its customers?
Okay, so we work in a PCI compliant manner. We don't store any credit card details. Again, our technology and its sort of DNA is sort of comes back from 6-7 years ago from a sort of, we built the technology from the ground up to be a fully automated process. So really we're not reacting to new trends of machine learning or AI. We've already from 6 years ago had that in our platform. So there's no real change in what we're doing, and all we're doing really is adding to that sophistication.
Wow. So in terms of Australia, even though we're a massive country, we're actually a very small market. So how would a retailer, if they move to an overseas market, are they likely to experience more fraud?
Yep, we actually had that on the slide, but definitely can point again. Look, moving into a new country, fantastic opportunity. I was just at a talk last night with some retailers talking about their journey about moving offshore. Very exciting, but again, the challenges of moving overseas, just like when they're opening up their retail concept stores, the different nuances, the different work hours, the different regulations, the different tax rules, and with that, all those differences, we have the same differences in fraud. You might end up spending a lot of money marketing and branding your company online overseas. Then it comes to your fraud sort of solution, and every fraudster's got to look suspicious, because guess what? You're not used to that type of consumer, and you're going to be, all you'll be doing is really not utilizing or maximizing your marketing spend and rejecting customers, and it's an uphill battle, as we know from what you spend to what comes out of checkout. Is sometimes a very tight mathematical equation, and adding to that false positives is really not optimal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is all of my questions for now, because a lot of them were answered throughout the webinar, but I'm going to throw it into the audience. Now, I'm sorry if I sound a little bit further away, I'm just reading the screen. So we have the first one from Grant, and it says, do you think the government is doing enough to help retailers defeat fraud?
Okay, government. Can't really speak on behalf of what the government's doing, but really I think that at the end of the day, I think that first step is really we can only look at our back door and look at our own sort of ecosystem in terms of the government. They sort of have their own guidelines. I really can't really talk about the government. It's a hard question. Maybe I'll have to come back to the person with a question and give them an answer, but really can't really talk about government and what they're doing.
No, that's fine. Yeah, if anyone has some burning questions, they can always contact Ata afterwards. Yeah. So we have one from Rupak. So what are my rights when fraud happens?
Okay, so there's this a merchant in terms of your rights. Okay, so I'll give you, so in terms of your rights, if you're a merchant, you're allowed to dispute the claim, and then you'll have to take that up with your bank. and good luck.
I know that a lot of banks are a lot better now when it comes to fraud. They're pretty pretty on the
But
ball.
I actually think that, back to a little bit to that question about the government, I actually see the banks trying to help their merchants, and definitely making sure that they're opening up their eye to new technologies, and
Wonderful. So, how do you actually win back those customers who have left because of fraud?
Wow. That's a hard one, because I really feel like once they've gone, they've really gone.
Yeah.
It's again, you've got to be proactive rather than reactive. It's really, I would recommend anyone. Like I visit a lot of companies. They're all re-platforming. They're all moving from Magento 1 to Magento 2, looking at sort of other enterprise level platforms. I think this is a great time to be looking at your fraud sort of capabilities, and moving that up in terms of automation and getting that right level of sophistication. Because Alex, you're right. When it's gone, it's gone.
Yep.
Very hard to win those guys back.
Definitely, it's all about preventative measures, isn't it? So, one final question from the audience: what has caused the increase in loyalty fraud?
Oh, okay. So two things. One is that I think a lot of merchants are offering loyalty fraud, and so the market size is growing. But at the same time, what's happening is that if you just look at just some of the airlines, they're not just offering loyalty points so you can redeem them for an airline ticket. Now they're actually being able to redeem them for a pair of sneakers, a toaster, a headset. And so really what's happening is that whole journey or that whole process is being monetized. And the minute you monetize any part of that journey, the fraudsters come in. So I would suggest that, really it's just that whole monetizing process has become really quite easy to do.
Yeah, you know what? We could talk about this all day. It's a very interesting and a very important topic. But at the moment, that's all we've got. So this has been a really fantastic webinar. Thank you very much for coming in. We will have recorded this entire webinar, and anyone that's interested, we will send it out to all of the attendees. Again, if you have any questions for Ata, please send them his way. He will do his best to answer them.
Sure, definitely.
And yeah, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you.